Our yard is small, quiet. Everyone knows each other. No hooligans, not many drunks, even the children are always very few. I moved here relatively recently, about 5 years ago. At first I didn't socialize with anyone, but over time I joined the friendly staff. We live here in a friendly way, running to each other for flour or salt, or to the handyman John from the neighboring house who repairs refrigerators and washing machines for a bottle of vodka. It all started when a family moved in next door. The day after they moved in, I woke up earlier than usual. I wanted to see the new neighbors, so as an excuse to go next door, I took my burned-out iron with me. I thought I'd drop it off at John's house and let him work on it. I put on my jacket, took the iron, and went. As I approached John's apartment, I looked at the door of the new neighbors. The apartments were next to each other. The door was ajar, all shabby. The paint was peeling. A rusty barn lock was clearly visible near the doorknob. I wondered how long this apartment had been closed. I thought, and rang John's doorbell. The door didn't open for a long time. At first I thought no one was home, but after a while I heard footsteps. "Who's there so early?" a hoarse voice said from behind the door. "It's me, John. Open up." There was a metallic clanking of a chain. The lock clicked, and the door opened. "What do you want?" "I came to see you for help. Will you take a look at the iron?" "Well, let's see what's wrong with it. You know how much it's worth." "Sure I do." I smiled. "How are the new neighbors?" "What neighbors?" "Oh, the ones from yesterday. So they saw the apartment yesterday and left." "So what do you mean they won't move in? Have you been inside? Who's going to live there?" After these words, the old man took the broken appliance from me and closed the door. A little upset and puzzled, I went to work. By the end of the working day, this story had practically vanished from my mind, and when I was walking home, I was already thinking about something else. As I approached my house, I saw someone's silhouette on my porch. The silhouette belonged to a very large person. I slowed down my steps and began to consider who was standing there. As I got closer, I saw that the person was very fat. I had never seen such a person in our yard before. I was even afraid to pass by him, but there was nothing to do. I had to go. When I got close enough to him, he looked at me, and at that moment, I could see him completely. His face was harmless, with a dull smile. It gave the impression that he was, shall we say, special. His eyes were empty and lifeless. I also remembered his clothes. They hadn't dressed like that in probably 100 years. An elongated jacket, from under which a shirt and a checkered pattern protruded ridiculously, a furry Ushanka hat. In his fist he was clutching a large nail. I calmly walked past him and went into the house. I lived normally for a couple of days, but then the trouble started. First, toys started appearing near my front door. Wooden cubes with letters, cars, and soldiers. This went on for a few days, and I would come home from work, pick them up, and throw them in the trash bag next to the stairs to the attic. But the next day, new ones would appear. Then someone started scratching on my doors. When I first saw what happened to my door, I immediately remembered that fool and the nail in his hand, and realized it was his doing. One day when I was about to go to bed, someone knocked on my door so loudly that I almost had a heart attack. I slowly walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing outside the door was a familiar-looking thug, looking through the peephole and making an already unpleasant face. It felt like he could see me through the peephole. I kept staring at him. I was getting scarier by the second. He didn't say a word. Only a very loud singing could be heard. It went on like that for a few minutes. I wasn't going to open the door for him. Then he did speak. They let me go. He said in a nasty, high, almost childlike voice. His voice made me feel sick, and I bounced away from the door. As soon as I stepped away from the door, the pounding came again with double the force. Already the plaster was falling from the ceiling. I went to the door again and looked through the peephole. This time it was dark, as if a light bulb had burned it out in the hallway. I stood there trying to make out anything in the darkness when suddenly the light turned on. A face was right in front of me. He was standing right up to the door. The expression in his eyes changed from lifeless to mad and obsessed. "Victor, open up. I've been released to you," he shouted in a rough voice. "Victor who?" I thought. I didn't open the door that night. After knocking on the door for a while, he went somewhere else. The next day, the situation repeated itself. I didn't go to the door, and every time I flinched at the heavy knocking. I called the police. 20 minutes later, they arrived and rang the doorbell. I told them that someone was banging on my door. The policeman asked me a few questions, questioned the neighbors, but to my surprise, no one heard anything. No knocking, no screaming. Although we live in a paneled house. Then he told me to call them again, if it happens again. I didn't sleep all night. In the morning, to clear my head, I decided to go to John's apartment to see if he had fixed my machine. As I approached his apartment, the ajar door caught my attention again. After a moment of thought, I decided to go in and look around the stranger's apartment. All the rooms in this apartment looked like one. Stripped walls, rusty pipes, mold and rot. One room was closed off. My curiosity piqued, so I decided to see what was in there. When the door opened, I saw that all those toys that had appeared under my door were lying on the floor. I quickly walked out of the apartment and rang John's doorbell. "Who is it?" shouted the old man. "It's me, John. Open up quickly." The door opened. The old man was clearly drunk. "I haven't fixed it yet. Forget about that iron." "Tell me, who used to live in this apartment?" "A woman and her child," the old man answered. "A child? What child? What do you care? Just tell me what kind of baby." "Well, there was a pretty woman, a nice woman. I think her name was Mary. Her son was a fool. He was growing up, but he didn't get smart. His mother wouldn't let him go anywhere. He was always locked up at home. Only went to see Victor, his friend, when they let him go." "What Victor?" "Well, he had a friend named Victor. I think he's moved to Detroit now. By the way, did he live in the same apartment where you live?" "He was younger. We used to play together. But then Victor got older. He wasn't interested in playing cars with a fool. Then he went away to study. And the kid was dead by then. How did he die? I don't know. He just died. Mary moved out right away, closed the place down. I don't think it should have been open in the first place." I asked why, but the old man didn't say anything and slammed the door. The next day, the uninvited guest came to me again. The knocking on my door was even more powerful. The roar resembled that of an animal. I could bear it no longer. Grabbing my axe, I opened the door, but saw no one. It felt like he'd vanished in a split second, and I shouted loudly into the void, "Victor doesn't live here anymore. He moved to Detroit." I was never bothered by the overnight guest again. A few months later, neighbors told me that the same Victor who had moved to Detroit had recently been found dead in his apartment. A large, rusty nail had been driven into his head, and children's toys were scattered all over the apartment. Just like the ones I'd found the day before and the ones I'd seen under the door yesterday.